The attorney looked across the table at my daughter and her husband. She had a question, and she was going to ask it whether they liked it or not. "Mr. Aldridge," she said, and she was talking to my son-in-law, not to me, "is it your position that your father-in-law lacks the mental capacity to manage his own financial affairs?" Donovan straightened his tie. "We're concerned," he said carefully. "He's been making some impulsive decisions." My attorney, Greta Simmons, set down her pen. "Such as?" "Changing his will. Cutting off financial support that my wife and I had come to rely on. These are signs of cognitive decline." Greta looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at my daughter, Faye, who was sitting next to her husband with her arms crossed and her eyes aimed somewhere past my left shoulder. "Is that your position as well, Faye?" Faye finally looked at me. Whatever she saw in my face, it wasn't what she expected. I wasn't angry. I was just tired, the particular tiredness of a man who has finally stopped pretending. "Dad needs someone to look out for him," she said. I almost laughed. Let me back up. Because none of that makes sense without the 23 years that came before it. My name is Emmett Hale. I'm 64 years old, retired from 31 years as a civil engineer, and for most of my adult life, I believe that providing for your family meant giving them everything you had. My late wife Gloria would have argued with me on that point. She argued with me on it for years before she passed. Said I was raising Faye to expect the world handed to her on a plate. I told her she was being too hard on our daughter. I was wrong. Faye was our only child, and after Gloria died from ovarian cancer 11 years ago, it was just the two of us. Faye was 26 then, recently married to Donovan Marsh, a salesman with expensive taste and a talent for making other people's money feel like his. I thought he was charming enough when Faye brought him home. I missed what was underneath the charm because I was too busy grieving to look carefully. For the first year after Gloria died, Faye called every day. She came over every Sunday. She was a comfort, and I was grateful. Then she got pregnant with my granddaughter Sadie, and things shifted the way they do when a new life arrives. The Sunday visits became less frequent. The daily calls became weekly. I told myself that was normal. That's how it goes when people have their own families. What I didn't tell myself, what I should have told myself, was to notice what replaced the visits, the requests. The first one came 18 months after Gloria's funeral. A short-term loan to cover a gap while Donovan changed jobs. $8,000. I wrote the check without blinking. A few months later, a bigger ask. They'd found a house in a neighborhood that Faye loved, but it was a stretch. Could I help with the down payment? $42,000. I wrote that check too, and then the pattern set in, the way patterns do, quietly and gradually, until it became the shape of the relationship. Car trouble. A business idea Donovan wanted to pursue. Medical bills. Real ones, at first. Then less urgent ones. Then just the vague kind. The kind that are really just the financial pressure of people spending more than they earn. Over 12 years, I calculated it once, late at night with a glass of whiskey and a legal pad. The number that came out was $384,000. I put the legal pad in a drawer and didn't take it out again for a long time. The accident happened on a Tuesday in February. I was driving back from a hardware store, thinking about the deck I'd been building in the backyard. Gloria's garden was still out there, still blooming every spring with the peonies she'd planted. I wanted to put a proper sitting area next to it, somewhere to have coffee in the morning and feel like she wasn't entirely gone. A truck ran a red light, doing about 50, and hit the driver's side of my car. I woke up in the hospital with 4 broken ribs, a fractured wrist, and a hairline fracture in my pelvis. The doctor told me I was lucky to be alive. I told her I'd take her word for it, because lying there with tubes in my arm, with the IV beeping, with the fluorescent ceiling light hurting my eyes, I didn't feel particularly lucky. I called Faye from the hospital room. A nurse helped me hold the phone because my wrist was in a brace. She picked up on the 4th ring. I told her what happened. There was a pause, long enough for me to notice it. And then she said, "Oh my God, Dad, are you okay?" I told her the truth. That I wasn't seriously okay. That I was going to need help when I got home. That I couldn't drive, couldn't cook easily, couldn't manage the stairs without difficulty for at least 6 to 8 weeks. Another pause. "Dad, this is terrible timing," she said. "We literally just booked Cabo. We leave Thursday. It's Donovan's work trip/anniversary trip, and I've been planning this for 3 months." I said, "Faye, I'm in the hospital." I know, and I'm so sorry. "But the flights are non-refundable, and the resort, can you maybe stay in a rehab facility for a few weeks while we're gone? They're actually really nice now, the good ones." I didn't say anything. "Dad, would that work?" I looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then I said I'd figure it out, and I ended the call. My neighbor, a retired school teacher named Willa Hayes, came to the hospital the next morning with a container of soup and an offer to drive me wherever I needed. She helped me arrange a part-time home health aide, a woman named Dorothy who came 5 days a week and was worth every penny I paid her. Between Willa and Dorothy, I managed. Faye sent me a postcard from Cabo. It had a picture of the ocean on it. She wrote, "Thinking of you. Hope recovery is going well. Cabo is beautiful. Love, Faye and Donovan." I put it on the kitchen counter. I looked at it every morning while I made coffee. I let myself feel what I felt about it. Faye and Donovan came to see me 3 weeks after the accident. By then, I was moving around better. The fractures were healing. Dorothy had taught me a few tricks for managing on my own. They came in looking tan and relaxed. Donovan in a linen shirt. Faye with her hair blown out the way she only did it when she'd been somewhere nice. They brought flowers, a big cheerful bouquet from a grocery store, and Donovan shook my hand and said it was good to see me on my feet. We sat in the living room. Faye asked questions about the driver of the truck, about the insurance claim, about whether I needed anything. The conversation had the feel of an obligation being completed. I watched their faces while they talked and thought about something Gloria had said to me once, years ago, right before Sadie was born. She'd said, "Emmett, I love our daughter, but she has never once asked you a question where she wasn't waiting for the answer to circle back to her." I defended Faye then. I didn't argue with Gloria's memory now. About 20 minutes in, Donovan leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, the posture of a man getting to the point. "Emmett, while we're here, we've been looking at a commercial space for the new business. The location is perfect, but we need to move quickly on the lease, and we're about $60,000 short of where we need to be." I looked at him. "We'd pay it back," Faye added quickly. "This business is different, Dad. Donovan has a real partner this time, and they've already got commitments from 2 clients. I turned to look at her. She was watching me with that particular expression she'd had since childhood. The one that said she expected a yes, was only asking as a formality. I said, "No." She blinked. "What?" I said, "No." Donovan's expression shifted. "Emmett, I've been keeping a record," I said quietly, "since Gloria died. Every transfer, every check, every wire. It totals $384,000 over 12 years. I paused. "I nearly died in a car accident 4 weeks ago. You were in Cabo. Nobody said anything." "I'm not a bank," I said. "I should have said that a long time ago. But I'm saying it now." Faye stood up. Her voice, when she found it, was tight and controlled, the voice she used when she was very angry and trying not to show it. "You're seriously going to hold Cabo over me? The trip was already paid for. You told me to go. I told you I'd figure it out," I said. "That's not the same thing." They left shortly after. The flowers sat on the kitchen table. After a few days, I threw them out. I changed my will that April. Greta had been my attorney for 15 years. She'd handled Gloria's estate, and she wasn't surprised by anything I told her. She helped me restructure things so that a significant portion of my estate would go into a trust for Sadie, accessible when she turned 25, or for educational expenses before that. The remainder would be distributed carefully, with conditions. Faye was not excluded. She's my daughter, and whatever she's become, I still love her. but the unconditional river of money was done. I also stopped the monthly transfer I'd been making to Faye and Donovan's joint account, $2,200 a month, which I'd been sending for 3 years, originally described as help while Donovan gets the new business off the ground. The business had never gotten off the ground. The money had become furniture, vacation deposits, and whatever filled the gap between how they lived and what they actually earned. The month after I stopped the transfer, my phone rang 18 times in a single weekend. Faye. Donovan. Faye again. A number I didn't recognize that turned out to be Donovan calling from his work phone. I let them go to voicemail and listened to the progression. It started with concern. Dad, we're worried, we just want to talk. And moved through frustration to something that stopped being careful and started being honest. By Sunday night, Donovan's voicemail said, "This is going to cause real hardship, Emmett. We have obligations. You made commitments to us. This is not how family works." I saved copies to my email and called Greta on Monday. The letter arrived 6 weeks later. A petition to have me declared mentally incapacitated. Filed by Faye, with Donovan listed as co-petitioner. The grounds cited were my erratic financial decisions, including abruptly and without cause ending support payments and unilaterally changing my estate plan in ways that did not reflect his long-standing wishes. Attached was a letter from a physician I had never seen, a doctor, Elmore, in a city I had never visited, stating that based on a records review, not an examination, a records review, there were signs consistent with early cognitive impairment. I sat at my kitchen table and read it twice. Then I called Greta. "I was wondering when this would happen," she said. "You expected it?" When people are used to receiving money and the money stops, they look for levers to pull. This is a lever. She paused. "It's also fraud, and I'm going to enjoy demonstrating that." The hearing was in the 3rd week of October. The judge was a woman in her late 50s, with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the particular patience of someone who had seen every variety of human behavior and was no longer surprised by any of it. Greta had done her work. She had documentation from my actual physician, Dr. Tom Ewan, who had treated me for 11 years, attesting that I was in good cognitive health, that my recent decisions were consistent with his knowledge of my character and values, and that he had not been consulted by or communicated with Dr. Elmore at any point. She had the wire transfer records, the check register, the timeline of the Cabo trip against the hospital admission date. She had, in short, the truth. And the truth, laid out in documents on a table, is a remarkably efficient thing. Faye's lawyer tried to frame it as a family dispute over estate planning, which is a gentler way of saying what it was. The judge listened. She looked at the paperwork. She asked Faye 2 questions directly. Over the objection of her attorney, "You were informed of your father's hospitalization while you were on vacation?" Faye said yes. "And you chose not to return?" A pause. The trip couldn't be yes or no. Yes. The judge set down the documents. "The petition is denied. Mr. Hale is demonstrably competent. The medical declaration submitted by petitioners is irregular at best and fraudulent at worst, and I'm referring it to the medical board for review." She looked at Faye's lawyer. "I'm also awarding legal costs to the respondent, $18,000, payable within 60 days. Faye made a sound I couldn't quite classify. Not quite a gasp, not quite a word. The gavel came down. In the parking lot, Greta walked me to Willa's car. The October air was cool and clear. "They won't pay the $18,000 easily," Greta said. "I know. If they default, we have options. Liens, wage garnishment." "Let's cross that bridge," I said. I got in the car. Willa squeezed my arm and didn't say anything, which was the right call. We drove back through town in the late afternoon light, and my phone started buzzing before we hit the highway. Faye. Declined. Again. Declined. By the time I walked through my own front door, I had counted 41 missed calls. All Faye or the number I now recognized as Donovan's work phone. I listened to the voicemails that evening. sitting in the armchair in the living room, where Gloria's reading lamp still stood. The calls moved through stages I recognized from the petition letter. The controlled concern giving way to frustration, giving way to something raw and less considered. One message was mostly silence, then Faye's voice saying, "I can't believe you did this to us. I cannot believe this is what you've become." I thought about that. What I'd become. I'd become a man who stopped writing checks. I'd become a man who needed help after an accident and didn't get it from the person he expected it from. I'd become a man who spent a Tuesday in February looking at a fluorescent hospital ceiling and decided, quietly and without drama, that something had to change. I deleted the messages and went to bed. The weeks after the hearing were quieter than I expected. No calls. No letters. Just the silence of people who are occupied with the consequences of their own choices. Through Sadie, I got fragments. Sadie was 16, old enough to have her own phone and her own relationship with me, which Faye had been unable to fully control. She called me on a Saturday 3 weeks after the hearing, voice low the way teenagers talk when they don't want to be overheard. "Grandpa, they're fighting a lot." "I know, sweetheart. Mom keeps saying it's your fault. But Dad..." She stopped. "What did Dad say?" "He said it was his fault, that he pushed too hard, and now there's no fixing it." A pause. "They had a really big fight about that." Mom threw a mug. I thought about Donovan saying that. Thought about whether a man who could say that to his wife, in the middle of a crisis he'd helped create, had any of the right material in him. "Are you safe?" I asked. "Yeah, I'm in my room." "Grandpa, are you okay? Like, really okay?" "I really am," I said. And for the first time in a while, I meant it completely. She asked if she could come visit. I told her any time she wanted. The financial deterioration happened faster than I expected. Greta kept me informed through proper channels, which meant I knew about it without having sought it out. The legal costs weren't paid by the 60-day deadline. Greta filed for collection. The process began grinding forward with the impersonal efficiency of legal machinery. Slower than anger, but more permanent. Separately, the lease on the commercial space Donovan had been pursuing fell through when the financing didn't materialize. The business partner he'd referenced apparently had different numbers in mind. There were credit card balances, I learned later, accumulated over the course of the previous year. The total was significant. They had been living on the expectation of my money, not just the recent payments. The entire architecture of their financial life had been built on the assumption that I would always cover what they couldn't. When that assumption became untrue, the structure it had been holding up began to show its actual condition. In November, Sadie called to tell me they'd sold the car. Not the practical one, the good one. The one Donovan drove, a 3-year-old Audi that he'd wanted and that I'd helped finance years ago in a moment of particularly poor judgment on my part. They were down to one older vehicle that Faye drove to work. "Mom is really embarrassed about it," Sadie said. "She says it's humiliating." I thought about a lot of things in response to that. I chose not to say most of them. Donovan called on a Thursday in December. I considered not answering, but something about the timing. A Thursday morning, a working hour, a sober and deliberate choice rather than a late-night impulse, made me pick up. "Emmett, Donovan." A long pause. "I'd like to talk," he said. "Just talk. Can we meet somewhere? I'm not asking for money. I know that's gone. There are some things I should have said before any of this happened." I agreed to a diner near downtown. Neutral territory. I drove myself. My wrist had healed. My ribs were long past aching, and arrived a few minutes early and ordered coffee and waited. He came in looking like a man who had slept badly for a month and had stopped trying to hide it. The linen shirts were gone. He was wearing a plain blue sweater, a little worn at the cuffs. He slid into the booth across from me and wrapped his hands around a coffee cup and didn't speak for a moment. I let him find his way to it. "I want to say I'm sorry," he said finally. "For the petition. For the doctor letter. I knew it was wrong when we filed it. I told Faye it was wrong. But I went along with it, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you it was all her idea. I waited. I've been thinking about the number, he said. 384,000. You said it in your living room, and I sat there and I didn't let myself think about what that actually meant. Would it cost you? I just heard a problem I needed to solve. He stopped. That's who I've been, Emmett. Someone who turns other people's generosity into problems to be solved for himself. I've known it for years. He shook his head. It's easier not to know things when not knowing is profitable. I sipped my coffee. I'm not asking for anything, he said again. I want to be clear about that. The marriage is in trouble. Probably past trouble, honestly. Faye and I aren't in the same place about any of this. She still thinks you owe us something. I know you don't. He looked up. I know you never did. I looked at my son-in-law, a word that suddenly seemed complicated, and tried to find what I actually thought about him. He'd been in my life for 18 years. He'd eaten at my table. He'd been in the waiting room the morning Sadie was born, and I'd shaken his hand that day with something close to real warmth. He'd also spent a decade treating my money like an inheritance he was just waiting to access. What are you going to do? I asked. Find an apartment. Get a second job if I have to. Take care of Sadie when it's my time with her. He paused. Be a better father than I was a son-in-law, I hope. I thought about that for a while. The diner hummed around us. I'm not changing the trust, I said. Sadie's funds are protected, and they stay that way. I wouldn't ask you to change it, but Sadie shouldn't suffer because the adults in her life made bad choices. I set down my cup. I'll maintain her directly. School things, medical things. Through Greta, not through you or Faye. Is that understood? Yes. And Donovan. He looked up. If I find out that any of this is performance, that 6 months from now you're back to the same patterns, we won't have another conversation like this one. I understand. We sat there for a few minutes longer, not saying much. The kind of quiet between two people who have said the necessary thing and don't need to fill the space after it. When I stood up to leave, he stood too. He extended his hand. I looked at it for a moment, then I shook it. The divorce was finalized in February, a year almost to the day from the accident. Donovan got a one-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city. He was working 50-hour weeks, his regular job and weekends, helping a friend's contracting business. Sadie stayed with him every other week and called me on the Sundays she was there. He was present. That was the word she used. He's just present now, Grandpa, like he actually shows up. Faye was harder to account for. She'd moved into a rental on the other side of town, a far cry from the house I'd helped furnish over the years. She kept her job, which she was good at. She'd always been competent at work, whatever else. But she wasn't returning my calls, the ones I made, cautiously, a couple of times in the spring. She let them go to voicemail, and the voicemails she left back were brief and careful, and told me nothing about what she was actually thinking. Sadie passed messages between us sometimes, the way children of divided houses always end up doing, and I tried not to put her in the middle of it more than necessary. What I heard, in fragments, that Faye had taken up running, that she'd started seeing a therapist, that she'd told Sadie once, after what sounded like a particularly honest session, that she had some things she needed to work out. I didn't know what to do with that. I let it sit. In April, on a Saturday morning, my doorbell rang. Willa was visiting. She'd brought her famous lemon cake, which she brought on any occasion that merited it, and some apparently required none. And she got to the door first and came back to the kitchen with a look I couldn't entirely read. It's Faye, she said quietly, and she has Sadie with her. I put down my coffee and went to the door. Faye was standing on my porch in jeans and a plain jacket, no makeup, hair pulled back. She looked tired in a way that was different from the court-hearing tired. Not the tired of a person under siege, the tired of someone who has been doing difficult interior work and isn't finished. Sadie stood beside her, watching me with the expression of a teenager who has been recruited against her will into a delicate adult situation and is trying to make herself invisible. "Hi, Dad," Faye said. "Faye." She looked past me into the house. "Can we come in?" We sat in the living room. Me in the armchair, Faye on the couch. Sadie next to her mother with her phone face down on her knee, a small act of unusual discipline. Willa appeared briefly in the doorway, caught my eye, and withdrew. There was a long silence. I waited. "I owe you an apology," Faye said finally. "I owe you more than one, but I'm going to start with the most important one." She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. "When you called from the hospital, after the accident, I chose the vacation. I knew what I was choosing. I told myself the story about the non-refundable flights and the timing, but I knew. And I went anyway, and I'm sorry. I'm genuinely sorry for that." I didn't say anything immediately. "I've been telling myself a different story for a long time," she continued, "that you were choosing to give us money, that it wasn't about pressure or expectation, that asking wasn't wrong because you were always willing." She paused. "My therapist had a word for it. The word isn't flattering. You don't have to." "No, I do." She looked up. "I've been treating you like a resource, Dad. I've been doing it so long I stopped seeing you as a person. And then you got hurt, and the first thing I thought, the actual first thing, I'm ashamed to say it, was what it would mean for us financially if something happened to you, before I thought about whether you were okay." Her voice was steady, but it cost her something to keep it that way. "That's not who I wanted to be." Sadie reached over and took her mother's hand. It was such a quiet adult gesture that it stopped me for a moment. "I'm not asking to restart the payments," Faye said. "I'm not asking you to change anything about the will. I know I don't have standing to ask for any of that, and honestly, I think I needed this. I needed things to stop working the way they were working." A short, complicated exhale. "I just needed to come and say I'm sorry while I still had the courage." I looked at my daughter. I thought about who she'd been when she was 7 years old, making me birthday cards out of construction paper and taking them very seriously. I thought about who she was at 16, sharp and funny, testing every idea I offered. I thought about Gloria saying, not unkindly, that Faye had learned too well the lesson, that asking for things got you things. I thought about who was responsible for that lesson being available to learn. "I'm not going to tell you it didn't hurt," I said, "because it did. And the petition. Faye, you tried to have me declared incompetent. That's not something I'm going to just fold into the past and act like it didn't happen." She nodded. Eyes wet but not crying. "But you're here. You're saying the right things. And I've known you long enough to know the difference between when you mean them and when you don't." I paused. "I think you mean them." "I do." "Then we'll start there. We'll see where it goes." I looked at Sadie. "How do you feel about lemon cake?" Sadie's relief was so visible it was almost funny. "I feel excellent about lemon cake." I called for Willa. The Gloria garden was in bloom by May, the peonies she'd planted coming up again as they always did, stubbornly and beautifully. I'd finished the deck in March, working on it a little each day when the weather allowed. It had taken longer than I planned because I kept adding to it. A bench here, a railing, a small section of lattice for the climbing rose that had overgrown the fence. It was a good deck, solid work, the kind you build when you're not in a hurry. One Saturday morning, I took my coffee out there and sat in the early light and looked at the peonies and thought about everything that had happened in the last year. The accident. The hospital ceiling. The postcard from Cabo. The wire transfer records, the hearing and the gavel, and Greta's quiet satisfaction. The 41 missed calls. The diner booth and Donovan's worn cuff sweater. The porch and Faye's tired, honest face. Sadie was coming for lunch. She was going to help me plant the summer vegetables Gloria had always grown. Tomatoes, squash. The specific kind of basil she'd insisted on. Sadie had watched her grandmother do it years ago and remembered more than I expected. That surprised me and pleased me in a way that was hard to describe. The things that carry forward. The things that survive. Faye had called last Tuesday, just to talk. No ask underneath it, no angle I could find. We talked for 40 minutes about small things. Her job, a book she was reading, a television show Sadie had gotten her into. It was tentative. The way something new is tentative. Or something old, being built into a different shape. I was not finished deciding how I felt about all of it. I didn't think I was supposed to be yet. What I knew was this. The money was gone. Given, not returned, and I'd made my peace with that. The house I'd believed was my home had turned out to be a little smaller than I'd thought, and I'd had to do some reconstruction. But I was standing in my own backyard on a quiet Saturday with good coffee and my wife's peonies and a solid deck under my feet, and nobody needed anything from me at that moment. That was enough. For right now, that was more than enough. I went inside and called Sadie to confirm lunch, and she answered on the second ring, which she always did, and said she was already in the car. Some things you build from nothing. Some things you rebuild from what's left. Either way, you have to start somewhere. You have to pick up the first piece and decide it's worth the work. I had decided. I've had a lot of time to think about how I got here. Not in a bitter way. I moved past bitter somewhere around the third week of recovery, lying on the couch with Dorothy, bringing me soup, and Willa checking in at the door, realizing the people who showed up for me weren't the ones I'd spent 12 years writing checks to. That was clarifying in a way nothing else had been. What I keep coming back to is this. Every choice in this story had a cost, and eventually, every cost got paid. That's not a mystical statement. It's just what I watched happen in real time. Faye and Donovan made choices. The vacation, the petition, the years of taking without asking, whether it was right to take. And those choices built a structure that looked stable until the foundation was gone. When I stopped being the foundation, the structure showed what it actually was. That's not punishment. That's just how weight-bearing works. And I had my own cost to pay. I spent 12 years telling myself that writing checks was the same thing as being a good father. It wasn't. It was easier than the harder conversation. The one where I said, I love you and I'm not doing this anymore. The accident didn't change me. It just made it impossible to keep pretending. You can't lie to yourself from a hospital bed at 2 in the morning. Everything gets very clear. What I've learned about moral courage, real moral courage, not the dramatic kind, is that it's mostly just the willingness to have the uncomfortable conversation before it becomes a crisis. Donovan said something in that diner that I keep thinking about. He said it's easier not to know things when not knowing is profitable. That's one of the most honest sentences anyone has ever said to me, and it applies to both of us. I didn't want to know that the money was substituting for something harder. He didn't want to know that he'd stop becoming his own man. We both paid for that chosen ignorance in different ways. Sadie is the thing I feel best about in all of this. She came through it with more wisdom than most adults I know, quietly holding her mother's hand at just the right moment, calling me on Sunday mornings just to talk, planting tomatoes the way her grandmother taught her, and remembering exactly what to do. I didn't give her any of that. She built it herself. That's the kind of thing you can't buy and can't give, and watching it made me understand, late in life, what actually passes forward from one generation to the next. I don't know yet what Faye and I are going to become. We're in the early, careful part of something, and I'm not rushing it. She showed up on my porch and said the true thing without asking for anything in return, and that cost her something. I saw it cost her. That matters to me. What I know is that I'm sitting on a deck I built with my own hands, next to a garden my wife planted, watching something grow that I'm choosing to tend. That's not nothing. After everything, the accident, the petition, the 41 missed calls, the diner booth, the lemon cake, that's actually quite a lot. You can spend a lifetime giving people things they didn't earn and wondering why they don't value them. Or you can stop, absorb the fallout, and find out who's left when the transaction is over. It's a harder way to live for a while. Then it isn't.